Good morning, guys, and welcome to my unboxing and review of the Master Grade Heavyarms Custom EW. This is a premium Bandai 2016 release that's heavily based on 2012 standard release, the Heavyarms EW. So this is, of course, going to be the Endless Waltz movie version of the Heavyarms Custom, and this is pretty much going to be almost just a recolor of the standard Heavyarms EW. The main differences are this is going to include a second beam gatling gun. I don't remember if the normal Heavyarms EW version has a double barrel beam gatling or just a standard one, but in this case this has two double barrel beam gatling guns, so you can have four firing at once going full bore. The other main difference is, of course, going to be the inclusion of this half clown mask thing, which I don't know exactly why it has it outside of Troa being a former circus clown, but it's a little odd to me. But that's just a lot of wing designs in general. So I got this kit for $53, which is about $10 to $13 more expensive than you can get the regular Heavyarms for. You can regularly find that kit for $40. Most places also have it for most places that they don't have it for 40 will have it for 45. It's relatively cheap compared to a lot of modern master grades, but it is an over 10-year-old kit. The real question that I have with this kit is, while in general I like the design minus the clown mask, I don't know if the extra stuff you get in here is worth the extra $10 to $13, but that's what this review is here to find out. So, getting right into it, of course, the front box art here is quite nice, but it is in a pretty typical p-bandai monotone here, in this monotone, I guess, aquamarine or turquoise color, because the main color of the Heavyarms Custom EW is going to be a darker turquoise color with some stripe accent parts in teal. But of course, being a typical p-bandai style box, there is going to be pretty much no information on the outside of the box. So let's get right into it. Inside the box, we get 6 bags of runners, which is pretty much what I expected. I didn't think this was going to have that many parts to it, considering, one, the wing Gundams themselves are a little smaller than your typical Gundam, and two, this isn't going to have that much extra over the standard Heavyarms, like I said earlier. But of course, in addition to all of that, you are going to be getting this Master Grade manual, which is in full color, which is quite nice, with a kind of cutout of the box art here of Heavyarms itself going all out, firing everything it has. The chest gatlings, the missile pods all over the Gundam, the 2 twin barrel beam gatlings, with, of course, the half clown mask on. So getting into the build itself here, we, of course, are going to have a simplified build order of the kit, which looks like it's going to be pretty typical. You're going to do torso, head, arms, waist, legs, backpack, and weapons. And then we get our parts list here, which, in pretty typical color swap p-bandai Master Grade fashion, we are going to have duplicate runners for better color accuracy, because, of course, the main difference between this and the standard Heavyarms is going to be an altered color scheme. And the parts list continues on to the second page over here. This is going to talk about there are going to be undergated parts in this kit, so just this is how you cut them out. And then we get into the build, which is going to, of course, start with the torso. In terms of complexity, this looks pretty typical for a Master Grade, nothing too crazy. It does look like we're going to have some decent part separation here in terms of like the stripes and stuff, so that's pretty nice. And then we get into the head, of course, which is pretty typical Master Grade stuff. Then you move on to the arms. Again, it does look like the frame, at least, might be a bit different with all these XB runners, but again, I'll find out when I take a look at the runners if those are from the original Heavyarms, which I've had in the backlog for a bit, I just haven't gotten around to building it. But yeah, you continue the arm construction here, pretty standard stuff, and then you move on to the waist. So this is going to, being based on an over 10-year-old Master Grade, this is going to be making use of some polycaps there, as you can see in the waist. Then after that, you move into the legs and feet. So yeah, all this looks pretty standard as far as construction goes. So I'm not expecting anything too crazy. Of course, you have these very large missile pods that go on the side of the legs there. And of course, you get into the backpack, which looks a little funky, but that's just because I'm pretty sure these also serve as like mounting racks for the beam gatlings if they're not attached to the arms. And of course, talking about articulating all of the hatches to pose the Heavyarms like it's going all out and firing everything. Of course, you build 2 of the double gatling guns there, so pretty much everything you would expect from the Heavyarms Custom EW, and then your decal guide on the back here. And in typical p-bandai Master Grade fashion, this is going to come with a nice set of water slides, which is nice to see. And you're going to get your color guide here on the bottom in full color. You can pause now if you want to use any of these colors in your kits. So, with all that out of the way, getting into the contents of the bags. So inside the bags, we get 17 runners, which is quite a lot for a Master Grade, but unfortunately, we are also going to be getting this sheet of color correcting stickers. Some of these are going to be pretty expected. Of course, you're going to have your eye stickers there, head camera stickers. You have your sticker for the half clown mask. All of those are pretty expected. Not really going to fault the kit for those. What I am going to fault the kit for are all of these teal stripe stickers there. It looks like pretty much the only ones that are actually part separated on the model are going to be the ones in the chest. All of the other ones are going to be stickers, which is a little unfortunate. Of course, in addition to that foil color correcting sticker sheet, we're going to be getting this sheet of water slide decals. Always nice to see, just a lot of marking details there, the unit designation for the heavy arms, all of that good stuff. Always great to see. And as for the runners themselves, so these runners are printed in February of 2025. As I mentioned earlier, being based on a slightly older master grade, this is going to be using polycaps from PC205 here for a set of 1/100 polycaps for things like the hips, feet, etc. Runner A here from the original Heavy Arms is going to be a multicolor runner coming in 3 different colors. We have this dark turquoise here for the main armor tone of the Heavy Arms. We have parts for the chest, we have parts for the head, we have parts for the skirts, some accent parts there, some accent stripes, which we aren't going to be using, and we have parts for, I think, the side antennas on the Heavy Arms head. We have gray here for a bunch of accent parts. We have parts for the backs of the hands, we have parts for the back of the torso, other parts for the torso, and a bunch of, I guess, vent framing details. And then we have yellow here for some accent parts and the V-fin. Runner B here in white is going to be armor parts for the limbs, which are all of the white parts on this kit for the arms, legs, etc. We also have the collar there, we have the muzzle, and we have the standing and sitting pilot figures of Troa Barton there. We also have a beam saber over there, which I think was only used when the Heavy Arms was being piloted by Hero to dual Zex. So I don't know if that's going to be used in this kit. I assume not. Runner C1 here, still from the original Heavy Arms, going to be a bunch of accent parts here in a very dark navy blue, going to be mostly parts for the feet here and the skirts. Runner C2, still from the original Heavy Arms, going to be in this dark turquoise. That's the main armor color of the Heavy Arms Custom EW. This is going to be some parts for, I think these are the lower forearms going into the wrists, and then we have parts for the head, and I think those are skirt parts. Runner D, still from the original Heavy Arms, just recolored, going to be in this navy blue color for a bunch of parts for things like the arms and missile pods and hatches and things like that. Runner E in ABS here in this primer frame gray, going to still be from the original Heavy Arms. This is just going to be a lot of inner frame parts for things like the legs. You see these holes that are presumably going to be for the missile pods. You see parts for the chest gatling guns there, etc. Runner F here, we're going to get 2 of. These are the duplicate runners mentioned in the manual that are duplicated for color accuracy. One is going to be in gray here, and the other is going to be in navy blue. The duplicated parts are going to be for all of these missiles here. We also have these, I believe these are supposed to be the missile hatches and that flip open in the shoulders and things like that. That's nice to see. The unduplicated parts are a number of accent parts here and parts for the lower torso. Runner I from the original Heavy Arms is going to be this single part here in plain clear for the eyes and head camera. Runner I2, which is unique for the Heavy Arms Custom EW, going to be these 2 color separated teal parts that go in the chest. Like I mentioned earlier, these are the only teal color separated parts. All of the other teal stripe details are replicated with color correcting stickers, which is unfortunate. Runner J, which is also unique to the Heavy Arms Custom, is going to include all of these kind of armor parts here for things like the double gatling guns. Of course, we have new chest gatling guns. They are going to be doubled. Instead of 2, they're going to be 4. We have some white armor parts here for the lower torso and skirt, and we have a new standing pilot figure of Troa Barton. And then we have this accent part down here in this pale blue, presumably for the cockpit hatch. And in case I neglected to mention earlier, all of these other armor parts for the double Gatling guns are going to be in black. We get 2 of Runner K from the Heavy Arms Custom EW in this, I guess, slightly blue tinted gray for the barrels for the double beam Gatling guns. And then we get into our X runners. The generic kind of master grade wing frame runners are just labeled X whatever. So we get XA here, the generic kind of wing Gundam runner. That's just labeled XXXG. I think that's just Gundam 3. And this is going to be a bunch of frame parts for things like the lower torso, the waist. We have our hand parts here, which are going to be using swappable finger-style hands. And we also have our action base adapter. And then Runner XB we get 2 of in this primer gray ABS. Going to be a bunch of inner frame parts for the limbs. Notably, you see a bunch of parts for the legs here and the feet. So, with all the runners out of the way, I will see you after the build. All right, welcome back. Here's the Master Grade Heavy Arms Custom EW, snap built, panel lined, with what few opportunities there were, considering how kind of, I guess, in terms of surface detail, how sparse this kit is. We'll talk about that in a moment. Decaled up and top coated with Mr. Hobby Premium Flat Top Coat, and this kit was actually pretty solid, although a little bit more tedious than I was expecting, but we'll get to that in a moment. So starting with the build, a lot of this is pretty typical master grade stuff, a little bit older with an ABS frame and polycaps, which has a similar issue to the frames that I mentioned that I've talked about in other videos with the GAT frame and the RX-78 2.0 frame, where the polycap and the hips, the legs tend to be a bit loose and slip out of them, so you have to press them in very tightly so that that doesn't happen. So as long as you make sure that happens, and the joint for the leg going from the leg into the hip is together, it's two halves sandwiched together with a polycap in the middle, just make sure that's together very tightly. That does tend to come apart if you don't do that. Then the build is adequately stable. Even with the miniguns on, and Heavyarms does look a little bit bare here without his signature miniguns, but we'll get to that in the accessory section. In terms of the actual build complexity and stuff, the limbs themselves are actually surprisingly simple. Like, the arms and legs have comparatively very few parts compared to a lot of other typical master grades, but take up the same amount of page space in the manual just because of how involved the shoulders and the missile pods on the sides of the legs are. They are very involved, and it's fairly tedious to build them. I was finding myself a little bit annoyed with how much that the missiles had to be separated, but I think it's better than having it just molded onto the frame. It's just a necessary annoyance that kind of had to exist if they were making a master grade Heavyarms, the annoyance of having to separate all of those missiles in the shoulders and you having to put them in, not necessarily individually, but in a lot of cases in small groups of like 2 to 3 missiles. And in the legs here, the assembly for all of the doors was a bit annoying. But I think the end result is more than worth it, and the Heavyarms in terms of the build is a perfectly fine master grade. The polycaps might be a little annoying, but they do the job fine. So getting to aesthetics then, there's a lot of disparity in between people's opinions on the 5 Gundams in terms of the EW designs. So I'll get my opinions out there right now so you know where my biases lie. The Heavyarms Custom EW is my second favorite kind of movie EW design from the 5 Gundams. My favorite is the Altron. I think it got such a glow up over the TV version. Heavyarms is second, then Sandrock, then Wing, and then Death Scythe Hell. I despise how the Death Scythe Hell looks in the EW movie. Those bat wings are just way too much, and those feet are so goofy. But I am expecting the Master Grade Altron EW to get here in August as a p-bandai kit, so if you want to see that video, just make sure to sub and hit the notification bell so you get an alert when that video comes out. But in terms of the aesthetics of Heavyarms, it's Heavyarms, it's pretty iconic. When it has the miniguns on, it's all bulky and loaded up, and you can tell it is a weapons beast. Without the miniguns, it looks a little, not quite underwhelming, but I guess a little bit unassuming. There obviously is something up with this mobile suit with the missile pods on the sides and how bulky the chest and shoulders are, but without kind of flipping the parts open to expose all the missiles, then it is a little bit unassuming, which I think is really cool, especially with how kind of agile the Heavyarms is in universe, like surprisingly so for how many weapons it has on its person at all times. But I think that just contributes to how cool Heavyarms is. I really love this design, especially the EW movie version, for the Heavyarms Custom. I really like the color scheme of dark turquoise and light teal. I think that contrasts a lot more nicely than the orange and red of the original Heavyarms. Like, throw in a little bit of yellow and you have a Ronald McDonald color scheme for original Heavyarms. I'm not the biggest fan of that. I think this color scheme looks a lot better, and especially looks really cool, especially in nighttime scenarios. So I really love the kind of proportions, the aesthetic, the color scheme of the Heavyarms, and I think it's represented really well in model kit form. There are a few details that are here that weren't in the line art, such as these raised details on the knees here that do give a little bit extra. I guess it serves to break up what otherwise would be a very monotone kind of basic blocky geometric leg here. And all of that's enhanced by things like the armor separation gimmicks in the knees, which I'll talk about in the articulation section. But yeah, all you need to know is overall, this kit represents the Heavyarms Custom EW pretty much perfectly. I didn't notice any color inaccuracies with this kit, as you would expect from a master grade. It is just a little bit unfortunate that all of the teal stripes, apart from the ones on the chest, are put on this kit with stickers and not color separated parts. Speaking of which, I did use all of the stickers on this sticker sheet, so I'll go over them now really quickly, just where all the stickers are. So if you want to paint instead of using stickers, you know where they are in advance and what to kind of prepare for. Sticker 1 is of course going to be the metallic eye stickers here in metallic green and black. As you can see, the head sculpt of Heavyarms really helps give this very mean kind of glare that is pretty typical for all of the Wing Gundams, which really helps solidify their aesthetic as a bit unique compared to a lot of other kits. Like, there are some things like Seed are definitely edgier and meaner, but this this very thin glare where the eyes are barely visible underneath the brow is something really cool. Stickers 2 and 3 are of course going to be gold metallic stickers for the head cameras on the front and the back there. Sticker 4 is going to be for the clown mask right here You can't really see it because the sticker's on top of it. There's a raised detail on the mask part itself for the lips and a recessed detail in there for the little eye makeup there. So if you want to paint it in yourself, it is a lot easier to do than if it were just like marked by some simple like panel lines or whatever on the part, but you can do that if you want. And then stickers 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all going to be the teal stripes all across this kit. Sticker 5 is going to be the small stripes here on the skirt armors here on the front and the back. Sticker 6 is going to be the long straight stripe on the shoulders. Stickers 7 and 8 are going to be the smaller stripes here with the angles pointing down. Of course, these stripes on the chest are going to be part separated, as I mentioned earlier. And once you top coat the whole thing, I did it in matte here, all of the stripes look fairly uniform, and honestly, like, as long as you apply the stickers properly, nothing's peeling up, it does look pretty indistinguishable from if it would have had parts separated, kind of teal parts underneath the dark turquoise armor, which, if you don't like put your eye directly up to it, is adequate and looks fine. So don't necessarily feel the need to have to paint in all of the stripes. One thing just to note that I wasn't really expecting in terms of color accuracy is all of these missiles are color accurate. They're supposed to be gray. I thought you would have had to paint them in like orange or red or something. No, they're supposed to be gray, which I think is a little bit of an odd choice, but it is color accurate out of the box, which is good. So for a quick size comparison, here's the Master Grade Heavy Arms Custom EW next to a standard size High Grade being the High Grade Blue Destiny Unit 1, and a standard size Master Grade being the Master Grade Gym Sniper 2 White Dingo Team. As you can see, the Heavy Arms kind of stands in between a standard size High Grade and Master Grade, being a bit closer to Master Grade. If you know anything about the Wing Gundams, you'll note that they are a little bit shorter than normal. A standard Gundam is about 18 meters tall in universe. The Wing Gundams are, I think, 16.7, something like that, which means they're a bit taller than like late UC Gundams, which are, I think, 15 to 15.5 meters tall, but still shorter than the average sized Master Grade. So just something to keep in mind that this will take up less vertical space on your shelf compared to a typical Master Grade, but of course that is made up for the amount of kind of volume it takes up with the gatling guns and all of the hatches open and all of that, which we'll get to in a moment. So in terms of accessories, here's Heavy Arms with almost everything it comes with. There is one bonus accessory which we'll talk about in a moment, but starting as usual with the hand options, all of the wing kits are going to be using swappable finger style hands. The thumb is going to be on a ball joint with no point of articulation in the middle. Of course, you will be getting the closed fists that I have on the kit right now. In addition, you will get a pair of open expressive hands, one for each side, and a pair of holding hands, one for each side, which are supposed to be used with the handles on the gatling guns. If you're going to pose the Heavy Arms firing them, the handle is supposed to swing out, the Heavy Arms grabs onto it for more stable firing. You can pose it just firing the guns with them just stuck into the arms, but it does look a little bit awkward without it holding onto those handles. Of course, we're going to be getting this action base adapter here. It does the job fine, nothing much to say besides that. For standing pilot figures, you will get two standing Troa Barton figures here. This is from the original Heavy Arms EW, the Troa with his hands in his pockets wearing pants. And this is the standing Troa pilot figure from the Heavy Arms Custom. The main difference here is his hands aren't in his pockets and he is wearing shorts. Not really much to say besides that. You can paint it if you want. I just kind of put these unpainted pilot figures just next to the kits for a sense of scale. Of course, you are going to be getting this clown mask here that just kind of slots into the Heavy Arms head. I'm not going to show it off right now. You'll see it in the posing section, mostly because this has a very similar problem to the face mask from the Real Grade Gal Gaigar, if you ever built that kit, where it's not really held in place by anything, so it's kind of loose and is prone to falling out if you articulate the head a little bit too much. I had this issue multiple times, and I was just putting it on the head just to test it out, see what it looked like. It kept flipping down into the carpet, and it was very hard to find every time, so it's just something to keep in mind. It is a bit loose in the head. That's really the only kind of, I guess, fit issue that I would say that this kit has. And then, of course, you get the star of the show, the two double gatling guns. Now, for the original Heavy Arms, these were the only beam weapons that the Heavy Arms had. And for the EW version, the effect looks like it's shooting physical bullets, but it's very ambiguous whether or not they're supposed to be beam gatling guns or not. The manual just refers to them as double gatling guns, so again, very ambiguous there. If you know definitively what ammo the Heavy Arms custom gatling guns use, just let me know in the comments below. But yeah, these are very large, very impressive. The only articulation on them is going to be the handle on the den here that will swing out when it's in use. I just clipped my nail, so it's kind of hard for me to get to it, but yeah, it will swing out like that. The Heavy Arms will just grip onto this handle, and then you can pose your Heavy Arms holding onto the gatling guns for extra stability, looking all cool. And of course, to do that, they will just mount onto these holes in the arms like so. I would really have these mounted on the arms at all times, because without them, this hole in the arm looks really kind of awkward and weird, and if you want to pose your Heavy Arms without the gatling guns and you want it to not look odd, then you're going to have to fill it in with plot plate or something like that. But of course, that's where the storage racks on the back are for, if you don't want the Heavy Arms to have these on the arms. This adapter will just come out flip around, and then of course this rack will flip to the side, and then the Gatling gun will just clip into it like so. And then you can have the other one on the other side, and you have your heavy arm standing here with the two Gatling guns just kind of poking out the top, which does look very impressive. You just want it in a neutral standing pose. Just keep in mind that that will take up a lot of extra height on your shelf if you choose to display heavy arms like that. And in addition, you have all of the kind of integrated weapons that heavy arms has on its person at all times, but we'll talk about that in the articulation section. But quickly before we get to articulation, there is one bonus accessory that I mentioned earlier that's included on the runner, but you're not supposed to use with the heavy arms custom. It is, of course, going to be the beam saber that was included in the standard Heavy Arms MG release. That this was, I think it was really only used in when the Heavy Arms was being piloted by Hero when he was dueling Zex in the Arctic. It was just kind of, I think it was stored hidden inside of the Heavy Arms' arm, and it could like blow the arm off and to expose the beam saber so Hero could use it. But Heavy Arms Custom is not supposed to use it, but you do have it if you want. But anyway, getting into articulation now, starting with the head as per usual. The neck is going to be on a bit of a hinge that allows the heavy arms to look up extremely far, which is very useful for if you're posing your heavy arms doing the kind of leaping acrobatic motion and you want to kind of arch the back, tilt the legs downward a little bit, and arch the neck back to really kind of express the motion the heavy arms is going through. That's going to look really cool. You'll see that in the posing section. For a downward look, it can look down into its own massive pecs. You can get some extremely minor side to side tilt, almost nothing, and it can 360 about the peg. Just be very careful because these machine cannons, the heavy arms' chin tends to ram into it. That inhibits articulation. You can force it to 360, but I really wouldn't, just to be safe. Again, I don't know why you would want to twist the heavy arms' head around that far, but you can effectively get a 90-degree tilt before it becomes an issue. For the shoulders then, the joint will kind of swing forward to give a pretty decent 45-degree swing. It can rotate up independently of the arm a little bit before it will pop off of the peg coming out of the torso, but the Heavy Arms EW can really only get the arm up about 90 degrees before it'll want to pop out of that peg. You will get full 360 rotation about that peg, of course, just be careful you don't pop it off. You will get rotation in the upper bicep, although it is a bit tight after top coning, and this elbow cap thing appears to be a bit loose. That I didn't notice that as an issue before, but it has popped off twice now, so I don't know exactly if that's a problem with this kit in general, or if it's just an issue with just me articulating the arm a little bit too roughly. You will get a double bend in the elbow. That will give about a 135-degree bend right there before it collides with the very thick shoulder armor. The wrist is going to be on a ball joint with an extra articulation thing here. I believe that's for the beam saber to be able to kind of like point it at the viewer in a, almost like fencing-like pose, similar to what you saw with the burst saber in the Master Grade Vidar that I took a look at a couple weeks ago. And then of course in the shoulders you will have the missile hatch gimmick. The front hatch will pop open like so. The back hatch will rotate and spin out about a peg. And you have this very impressive kind of display with the heavy arms showing off all of the missiles in its shoulders. So you'll see that more in the posing section, of course. In the torso then, for an ab crunch, as you might imagine, seeing the very thick cockpit hatch going into the crotch armor, you get pretty much no front ab crunch to speak of. You do get a moderate back crunch, which really helps the heavy arms kind of, again, express the kind of acrobatic motions it is capable of with that kind of backwards flip that you'll see in the posing section. It can, of course, rotate, although you can only get about a 45-degree rotation before the heavy arms' torso will want to just stop it because it's colliding into things. You will get some minor side-to-side crunch. The cockpit hatch is supposed to be able to slide open even when the chest is closed, but of course it's easier to do it when the chest is open than just close the doors after. Speaking of which, the chest doors will, of course, open up to reveal the 4 gatling guns in the heavy arms' chest, and then the cockpit hatch slots open like that, and you can see a sitting pilot figure of Tro Barton in there. You can really only see his legs. He's supposed to like slide out of it when he's getting in and out of the heavy arms, but when it's in model kit form, you can only see the legs up to his knees, so not very much, and it's very recessed, so it's kind of dark and hard to see on camera. In the backpack then, like I demonstrated when I was talking about storing the Gatling guns, these kind of racks on the backpack will swing down when you're storing the Gatling guns on them, otherwise they sit up top here, where the like ARC-78-2 beam saber holders would normally be. These thrusters on the backpack can articulate a tiny bit, but not much, so really not much articulation in there. In the waist then, there is no hip drop or hip swing mechanism. These front skirts will slide up about 90 degrees. The side skirts will slide up a little under 90 degrees, and it can like kind of pivot and tilt from side to side. And the back skirts are very similar to the front skirts on ball joints, and they will be able to go up just under 90 degrees. Of course, there are missile racks in the skirt armors, because of course there are. On the front skirts here, you you just raise the armor square up a little bit and flip it open to reveal 4 missiles in the front skirts. And then in the side racks, this armor piece just kind of tilts outward to reveal 4 missiles in the side skirts. For kicks then, you will get about a 90-degree kick forward, about 90 degrees to the side. Again, just be careful, make sure you squeeze this joint fully shut. Before I did with pliers, it just kept coming apart. The polycap just kept like kind of forcing the two halves apart when I was doing articulation. So just something to keep in mind if you get this kit or the standard MG Heavyarms, because I believe they use very similar frames, so they would have similar problems. And for back kicks, you will get about 90 degrees backwards. Just be careful, because as you saw there, the thigh armor was starting to separate a little bit. You will get rotation in the thigh, of course, but it will collide with the waist before you can do a full 360. A double knee bend with a very nice armor separation gimmick in the knee here, as you can see. That looks very good. With a almost 180-degree bend, extremely impressive in the knee. Now, of course, the missile pods in the sides of the legs, the doors will open up like so, to reveal yet more missiles on the Heavyarms custom. And this isn't even the most kind of ridiculous version of the Heavyarms. There's the Heavyarms with the Eagle unit, which I wanted to get, but it got snatched up almost immediately the last time it was up on p-bandai, unfortunately, so I was not able to get my hands on it. In the ankle then, you really won't get any articulation out of the ankle armor, but the whole foot will swing forward like so, downward like so. You will get a 45-degree pivot to either side, some minor side to side tilt. There is some toe separation, but it doesn't let you go up, it only lets you go down, and you can tilt the foot down like so. So yeah, overall, Heavyarms articulation is, again, surprisingly good for how loaded this thing is with weapons. Of course, all the weapon articulation gimmicks look really good on the Heavyarms, and all of the articulation combined lets it pull off some surprisingly acrobatic poses in the air, which you will see in the posing section in a bit. So getting the Heavyarms custom EW into a bit of a spin here, starting with the usual running and gunning pose. Now, this was very surprising. I was not expecting this kit to be able to hit this one-legged running and gunning pose so easily. I thought that the balance of the kit would have been thrown off pretty badly by the double gatling guns on each of the arms, but I am happy to say that that was not the case. When they're mounted on the back, of course, this kit is very back heavy, as we'll see in some of the later poses. Even on like an action base 4 or something that's known to be a bit more robust, it does tend to tilt a little bit on the action base adapter, but while it's on the ground here, it can hit this running and gunning pose. It's not quite as dynamic as I would have liked. As you can see, the Heavyarms' kind of balance is definitely kind of pressing down directly onto the leg. You can't kind of swing the leg forward a little bit to give it a little more play, give the Heavyarms a little more dynamicism in this running. It does look a little bit stiff, but it does look fine. Heavyarms, kind of surprising for a very heavily armed mobile suit, looks really great in motion. I think we've all kind of internalized Heavyarms as a very acrobatic and agile mobile suit, mostly because Tro is the one piloting him, and he pulls off all of these like insane circus acrobatics with the Heavyarms custom. So I think that's kind of conditioned us to really expect to see the Heavyarms either in motion or kind of in an all-out firing pose, which you'll see in the conclusion section. But this is definitely a surprisingly fine pose for this kit. It looks great. The double Gatling guns are definitely extremely impressive weapons, and this is definitely something I might consider having this kit doing on the shelf if some of the aerial poses and especially the all-out firing pose weren't so good. Now, just to cover all my bases, here's the Heavyarms in a crouching pose with the double Gatling guns off to the sides, doing almost an all-out firing pose, only firing off all the weapons at the top half of the Heavyarms' body, the 4 chest Gatlings, and all of the missiles in the shoulders. Now, this is just to cover my bases, just to show off that the Heavyarms can crouch, although it was pretty awkward to get into this crouching pose. And in addition, like while I was trying to just move the arms out of the way and stuff, the shoulders tended to pop off of the pegs coming out of the torso if you rotated them too much, and the arms tended to pop off of the pegs coming down from the shoulders if you kind of articulated them to the side a little too much. So those minor annoyances aside, the Heavyarms was able to pull off this pose, although it's not something that looks very good on the Heavyarms because, one, it's not that wide-legged standing all-out pose that's very iconic for it, and two, it's none of the acrobatics that we are all very accustomed to seeing the Heavyarms custom do. So this looks a little awkward, and it really shows that the Heavyarms is really at its best when it's kind of expressing all of its like kind of length and size with all of its limbs, either in a full standing pose firing everything or in an acrobatic aerial pose, which you will see right now. So of course, getting the Heavyarms into the air in this iconic kind of like back-flipping pose with the Heavyarms firing both of the Gatlings off to its sides while it's doing kind of like a weird aerial upside-down pirouette thing combined with a backflip, which is really cool, definitely very flashy, very performative. And of course the clown mask is on here, which really adds to how unique this very acrobatic pose is, especially for such a heavily armed Gundam. That's just something I really want to get across, that a lot of the poses that this kit looks good in are very unconventional for such a heavily armed kit. Normally those kits are kind of bulky and large prefer to stay on the ground in either a defensive pose or in a kind of wide-legged all-out firing pose, which the Heavy Arms does excel in, but it also looks really good in these highly mobile, agile poses that a lot of suits really wouldn't be able to pull off, and they would look very awkward in. So yeah, this is definitely an extremely unique way to display Heavy Arms, and something I would definitely consider displaying on my shelf. It looks fantastic, the way you can kind of cross the legs a little bit to give a more graceful appearance, the way you bend the knees slightly, the way the back can arch and the neck can crane back to really express this kind of crescent moon shape that the Heavy Arms is forming in the air as it performs its flip. Of course, the Gatling guns off to the sides really add a bunch of extra volume to this, giving it a very unique combination of both bulk and elegance that you don't really see in a lot of kits. This is definitely something really cool. I would definitely consider posing Heavy Arms in this, or there's another aerial pose you'll see in the conclusion section, which is a bit unique. I posed it doing a kind of like flying missile kick with the pose kind of inspired by Deku's like shoot style kick from My Hero Academia. It could kind of pull it off, and it was definitely something really unique. That is just to say that the Heavy Arms looks very good in these aerial acrobatic poses, and I would definitely consider Heavy Arms doing this on the shelf. So getting into the conclusion here, as Heavy Arms enters its very iconic all-out firing poses, all of the missile hatches are open, the Gatling guns are kind of splayed out, firing at slightly different targets. The Heavy Arms can clear out a kind of a wide range of enemies out in front of it. There isn't really much to say about this pose, it just looks great. I'll just let the pose speak for itself while I talk about this kit in general. So in conclusion, the Heavy Arms Custom EW is a fantastic master grade that really kind of adds on to what the original Heavy Arms EW was doing, while also including its own unique spin on things with the incredibly nice color scheme, the very unique clown mask, which I personally am not a fan of, but is very iconic for the Heavy Arms, so they kind of had to include it, as well as kind of going super over the top with all the extra missile pods in the shoulders, quadrupling the amount of Gatling guns that the Heavy Arms has, doubling the amount of chest Gatlings. I think the leg missile pods stayed the same, but they were still pretty impressive on the original Heavy Arms. In terms of the build, this kit does feel a little bit dated with an ABS frame and polycaps. The polycap in the hips in particular is a bit of an issue, but that's a very common kind of complaint with kits from the late 2000s, early 2010s, where the hip polycap does mean that the legs do have a bit of a hard time fully going in there, and they will fall out if you don't make sure that they are fully inserted. But once that's done, the kit is pretty stable and surprisingly easy to pose. Really, the only fit issue I had with this kit was the clown mask easily falling off the head. It isn't really secured in there with anything, like I mentioned earlier. In addition, another thing that I neglected to mention earlier that I don't know if it's an issue with my specific kit, I think it is the heel on, I think, the left foot was pretty loose and kept falling off if I articulated the foot a little bit too much. So because I don't think that's an issue inherent with this design, because it, again, only happened to one heel on the foot, I think it might just be an issue with my kit in particular, but there's just something to bring up in case it happens to you. The build is fairly simple in a lot of aspects compared to a lot of typical master grades, except for things like the shoulders and the leg missile pods, where it gets very involved and a bit tedious, with all of the missiles in the shoulders in particular being separated parts. That means it's a little bit annoying to assemble, and it does take a little while, but the end result is more than worth it, and I think it was kind of a necessary evil that they had to do with this kit to make it a little bit tedious, but fully separate those missiles. That really helped them pop inside of the shoulder. It definitely would have looked a lot worse if it was just kind of built into the frame, so I'm very glad that they decided to do that. In terms of aesthetics then, it's Heavy Arms. This is a very faithful recreation of Heavy Arms in master grade form. It is pretty much entirely color accurate apart from the color correcting stickers, but if you do want to paint it in, all of the teal stripe details that aren't part separated, so everything other than the chest, are recessed details in the shoulders and skirts, so it should be fairly easy to paint in yourself if you have that color. And if you really want this kit to pop, you can paint all of the individual missiles if you want in orange or red. That would really help give splashes of color all across the kit, which I think would work a lot better on the regular Heavy Arms EW and not the Heavy Arms Custom, because this kit has a very kind of, I guess, subdued darker color scheme where that red and orange, where those red and orange missiles would kind of clash with the overall color. If you want, you can swap the missile color with, because they're duplicate runners for color accuracy, you can have the missiles in the shoulders and legs be in navy blue instead of in gray, which might help add a bit of extra color to your kit if you want to do that. That's just an extra option that this kit comes with, that they don't mention it in the manual, but something you can do if you want. In terms of accessories, this kit comes with pretty much everything you would want Heavy Arms to have. Again, most of its weapons are integrated into the mobile suit itself, with the only main handheld weapons being the double Gatling guns. You of course get an extra beam saber if you want to pose it with that, but it wasn't supposed to have it in canon, so It's not really something you're expected to use with it, and you don't get a beam effect with it, so you'll have to supply it yourself. In terms of posability then, this is where this kit falters a little bit. Like I mentioned earlier, there are some looseness issues where things like the shoulders will pop off the peg in the torso, the arms will pop off the peg in the shoulder, little things like that, which are a little bit annoying, but not a deal breaker for sure. There was a bit of an issue I was having with this kit where, because of how many things articulate when you're doing all-out firing poses, I was having an issue where as I was trying to get this kit into a position, every time I would pose something, I would accidentally kind of brush against another hatch or something and close it up, and it was just kind of a mess to deal with. I think the end result was, 1, more than worth it, and 2, just something that I don't think they could have really fixed in any way with all of the open hatch gimmicks Heavyarms is supposed to have. I don't think there was a way they could have implemented them where they wouldn't kind of be getting in the way of each other a little bit while you're trying to articulate them, if that makes any sense. So would I recommend this kit? If you like Heavyarms, absolutely. The only question is, are all of the kind of bonuses that this kit comes with worth the extra $10 to $13 that this kit costs over the standard Heavyarms? Now, that's something that you're going to have to answer for yourself. In my opinion, it is more than worth it. I think all of the extra bulk, all the extra gimmicks, all of the kind of extra over-the-top Heavyarms stuff that comes in this kit is definitely worth that extra cost. So to put it in one sentence, this is Heavyarms, but more. It's just more of everything that makes Heavyarms great, while removing some of the things that were a little bit goofy about the standard Heavyarms, especially the color scheme. I really don't like the color scheme of the standard Heavyarms, and I think this kit is much better in that regard. So yeah, I would absolutely recommend this kit if you are a fan of Heavyarms. And even if you are not a fan of Heavyarms, if you had to get one of them, I would definitely opt for getting this one if you want to just have like one representative of each of the Wing Gundams in Master Grade form on your shelf. So that was my review of the Master Grade Heavyarms Custom EW. What do you think of this kit? Let me know in the comments below. If you like videos like these, make sure to sub and hit the notification bell. If you like this video, give it a like, and I'll see you next time with my review of the high grade Zagok Freedom version. I'll see you then.